Scanning footage from a park, a ranger notices a shape beneath the lake surface. The air in the ranger station was thick and still, tasting of pine-scented cleaner and stale coffee. Outside, the August sun beat down on the parched landscape of Serenity National Park, turning the granite peaks into shimmering anvils. Elias Thorne sat hunched in the cool, artificial twilight of the surveillance room. The only sound, the low, steady hum of the server rack. His eyes, gritty from lack of sleep, scanned the bank of monitors displaying the park's arteries, hiking trails, parking lots, and the vast, placid expanse of Serenity Lake. It was a tedious, soul-numbing job, a digital ghost haunting a wilderness. He rarely got to walk anymore. He was 42, with a face weathered by a sun he now only saw through triple-paned glass, and a spirit worn down by bureaucratic apathy. He was a watcher, a custodian of pixels, his life reduced to a series of silent, grainy films. He took a long sip of lukewarm coffee, the bitterness a familiar jolt. His gaze drifted across the grid of screens. Monitor 7, the Deepwater Cove on the lake's northern shore, was his focus. It was a notoriously treacherous spot, a place of sudden drop-offs and icy undercurrents, where the postcard-perfect surface hid a cold, dark heart. A week ago, a local teenager, a bright, popular girl named Lily, had vanished near here. The official search had been scaled back, the narrative shifting from rescue to the grim, unspoken probability of recovery. The park officials, pressured by the wealthy lakeside community, wanted quiet. They wanted the tourists to see serenity, not sorrow. Elias, however, couldn't let it go. He'd known Lily. She'd volunteered at the station one summer, a whirlwind of freckles and impossibly earnest questions about forestry. The memory was a dull ache in his chest. So he watched. He spent his nights poring over the archived footage, a self-appointed vigil. Searching for a ghost in the machine, his mouse hovered over the timeline for camera 7. He dragged the cursor back, not days, but hours. 2:17 a.m., a flicker. He'd seen it before, a momentary distortion he'd dismissed as a digital artifact. A school of fish, a trick of the moonlight on the water. But something about it nagged at him, a splinter in his mind. He isolated the feed, blowing it up to fill the main screen. The image was monochrome, rendered in the ghostly greens of night vision. The lake was a sheet of polished obsidian, reflecting a bone-white moon. He advanced the footage frame by painful frame. The water rippled, then stilled. Nothing. He leaned back, the worn leather of his chair groaning in protest. He was chasing shadows, wasting time. He was about to close the file, when his finger froze on the mouse. He leaned forward again, his nose inches from the screen. There, not a flicker on the surface, but beneath it, a shape, a long, pale anomaly against the inky blackness of the deep. It was almost imperceptible, a subtle lightening of the pixels, a ghostly smear. His heart began a low, heavy drum against his ribs. "Come on," he whispered, his voice a dry rasp. "What are you?" He engaged the imaging enhancement software, a tool usually reserved for identifying poachers' license plates from a mile away. The server fan kicked into a higher gear, the hum rising in pitch. The program began its work, algorithms sharpening lines, clarifying contrasts, peeling back the layers of distortion. The shape slowly resolved, coalescing from a vague blur into something with form. It was long, too long for a sunken log, too slender, and it was pale, a sickly, unnatural white in the green-tinged water. A cold dread, slick and oily, began to seep into Elias's veins. He felt the coffee curdle in his stomach. He'd seen death before. A hiker who'd fallen from a ridge, a victim of a bear mauling. He knew its shape, he knew its stillness. The image sharpened further. He could make out limbs, a torso, a head, tilted at an impossible angle. It wasn't just a shape, it was a body. A wave of nausea washed over him. He gripped the edge of his desk, his knuckles white. It was anchored somehow, tethered to the lakebed, swaying gently in the unseen current, like a grotesque piece of kelp. The stillness was absolute, a profound and eternal lack of motion that screamed of violence. This was no accident. This was not a simple drowning. He forced himself to breathe, the air catching in his throat. His training kicked in, a thin veneer of professionalism over a chasm of horror. Document. Report. Do not contaminate the evidence. But his hands were shaking so badly he could barely control the mouse. Who? The question hammered at him. Was it Lily? The thought was a physical blow, knocking the wind out of him. He pictured her bright, smiling face, and then the pale submerged form on the screen. The two images collided in his mind, a horrific fusion of life and its brutal negation. He had to be sure. He needed a clearer image. He pushed the software harder, overriding the system's safety protocols, forcing it to render at maximum resolution. The server whined in protest, the screen flickering. For a moment, he thought he'd crashed it. Then, the image snapped into focus with horrifying clarity. The body was female. The long hair fanned out like a dark halo. It was tethered by the ankle, a thick rope leading down into the blackness. But it was the other hand that made him recoil, a strangled gasp escaping his lips. The hand was not empty, it was clenched tightly around something, a small metallic object that glinted even in the murky depths. He zoomed in, the pixels rearranging themselves. It was a locket. A small silver heart. Ilias's world tilted on its axis. He knew that locket. He had seen it 100 times, glinting around Lily's neck. He'd even teased her about it once, and she'd blushed, telling him it was a gift. From her grandmother, the room felt suddenly airless, the walls closing in. It was her, Lily, not lost, not drowned, placed there, anchored like an unwanted thing, discarded. A cold, furious rage began to burn through the shock. This was a grave. A secret, watery grave. His hand shot out for the phone, his fingers fumbling. With the receiver? He had to call Sheriff Brody. He had to report this now. But as his fingers brushed against the cool plastic, a chime from another monitor caught his attention. It was a proximity alert. Camera 4. The main access road leading to the North Shore. He glanced up, his mind still reeling. A pair of headlights cut through the pre-dawn gloom. A vehicle was approaching the lake, moving fast. Not a Park Service truck. This was a sleek, black SUV. The kind that belonged in a city boardroom. Not on a dusty park road. It pulled to a stop at the gated entrance to the private boat launch, the one reserved for the residents of the opulent Serenity Estates. A man stepped out. Even in the grainy footage, his silhouette was unmistakable. Tall, dressed in an expensive-looking jacket, he moved with an air of absolute ownership, as if the park, the lake, the very air belonged to him. He unlocked the gate with a keycard and drove through, the SUV's taillights disappearing down the path. Toward the cove, Ilias's blood ran cold. The North Cove, the same spot where Lily's body was submerged. Why was someone going there at this hour? His eyes darted to camera 7, the live feed of the cove itself. The water was still black, the first hints of dawn just beginning to soften. The eastern sky. Minutes passed, each one an eternity. Then, a light appeared on the water. A powerful beam cutting through the darkness. A boat. Not a fishing skiff, but a long, low-slung speedboat, a vessel of wealth and power. Its engine a barely audible purr. The boat glided across the water, its navigation lights blinking red and green. It came to a stop almost directly above the position of the submerged body. The accuracy was chilling. It was not a guess. It was precise. The figure from the SUV stood on the deck. He switched off the engine, plunging the cove into near silence, save for the gentle lapping of water against the hull. He walked to the edge of the boat, a powerful flashlight in his hand, and pointed the beam down into the water. The cone of light pierced the surface, a brilliant, invasive spear. Illuminating the depths, Elias could see the man's face now, upturned in the glow from the monitor. It was a face he recognized from local news and the glossy pages of regional magazines. Julian Croft, real estate mogul, philanthropist. The man who had single-handedly transformed Serenity Lake from a rustic getaway into a playground for the He owned half the shoreline. His sprawling mansion, a glass and steel monstrosity that lorded over the lake from the highest bluff. He was powerful, untouchable, a man who moved through the world as if he were exempt from its rules. Croft stood there for a long, silent moment, the flashlight beam fixed on the water. He wasn't searching, he was observing. There was a calmness to his posture, a terrifying lack of agitation. It was the posture of a man visiting a monument, or a man checking to ensure his secret was still safe. The injustice of it was a physical force, a pressure building in Ilias's chest until he thought his ribs would crack. Down below, hidden by the dark water, was the body of a murdered girl, a girl he knew, a girl whose only crime was her innocence. And up above, basking in the glow of his own power, was the man who had almost certainly put her there. The predator, returning to admire his kill. Ilias's hand fell away from the phone. Who would he call? Sheriff Brody. Brody was a decent man, but he was also a man who knew which side his bread was buttered on. Croft's donations had funded the new communications system for the sheriff's department. Croft's lawyers were the most ruthless in the state. To accuse a man like Julian Croft was not just to point a finger. It was to declare war on a king in his own kingdom. He stared at the screen, his own face a pale, haunted reflection superimposed over the scene. He saw the submerged girl, the powerful man, the dark water that connected them. And he saw himself, the accidental witness, the ghost in the machine who had seen the truth. The knowledge was a poison, spreading through him, cold and absolute. He was trapped. To speak was to risk everything: his job, his safety, perhaps his life. To stay silent was to let a monster get away with murder, to let Lily's memory be swallowed by the cold, dark water, her final silent scream unheard. The cliffhanger wasn't just on the screen. It was in his own heart, a precipice of impossible choices. Croft switched off his flashlight, the beam vanishing, plunging the cove and the secret it held back into darkness. The engine of the speedboat roared to life, a sound of arrogant, unapologetic power, and the boat sped away, leaving nothing behind but a trail of white foam on the black water, a fleeting scar on a surface that kept its secrets well. Ilias didn't move. He just sat there, the hum of the server the only sound in the world. The image of the locket, the rope, and the man in the boat burned into his mind forever. The sun was rising, but for Elias Thorne, the world had never felt so dark. The face of Lily Hayes was a ghost that haunted the corners of Elias's life long before he found her on his monitor. She was the daughter of Maria Hayes, the woman who ran the small, perpetually struggling diner in the nearby town of Oakhaven. Maria was a woman carved from hardship, her hands chapped and her face etched with the fine lines of worry that came from raising a child alone on a waitress's tips. She was all sharp angles and fierce, protective love. Lily was her opposite, soft, round, full of a light that seemed to defy the dim, greasy spoon world she was born into. Lily had spent the summer before her last year of high school as a park volunteer, a position Elias had helped her secure. He remembered her first day, how she'd stood in the doorway of the ranger station, her hands twisting the hem of her t-shirt, her eyes wide with a mixture of terror and excitement. She was afraid of the bears, the tourists, of doing something wrong, but she was more afraid of the life that seemed preordained for her, a life in Oakhaven, a life of taking orders and wiping down tables, a life where the horizon was the edge of the diner's parking lot. "I want to see the world, Mr. Thorne," she'd told him one afternoon, her voice barely a whisper as they sat on the station's porch, watching the sun set behind the peaks. "Not just in books, I want to be bigger than this town." He'd seen the hunger in her eyes, the same desperate yearning for escape that had once driven him into the wilderness. But where his escape had led him to a solitary room of screens, Lily dreamed of something more. She was saving every dollar she earned for college, for a biology program in a city 3 states away. She spoke of studying marine life, of wanting to understand the secrets of the deep. The irony was a blade twisting in Ilias's gut. Her secret world was her sketchbook. She carried it everywhere. It was filled not with doodles, but with incredibly detailed, almost scientific drawings of the park's flora and fauna. The delicate veins of a maple leaf, the intricate pattern of a beetle's shell, the precise anatomy of a trout. She saw the world with a clarity that humbled him. She saw the beauty he had stopped noticing. Her final entry, he would later learn, was a drawing of a rare orchid that grew only in the damp, shaded rocks of the North Cove. She had been so proud to have found it. She had shown it to him, her finger tracing the delicate petals on the page. "It's called a ghost orchid," she'd said, her voice full of wonder. "Because it's so hard to find, like it's not really there." Julian Croft was the park's benevolent king, its shadow landlord. He had arrived in Oakhaven a decade ago, a man of immense, almost mythical wealth, and a charm that could disarm a rattlesnake. He'd bought up the old, dilapidated fishing lodges and replaced them with architectural marvels of glass and cedar, homes that clung to the cliffs like eagles' nests. He'd created the Serenity Estates, a gated community for the 1%, complete with a private golf course, a spa, and a marina filled with boats that cost more than most people's houses. He'd donated lavishly the new wing of the local hospital, the state-of-the-art computer lab at the high school, the sheriff's new patrol cars. He was hailed as a savior, the man who had brought prosperity to a dying town. His face was everywhere, on plaques, in the local paper, smiling. Down from billboards, he was a man who curated his own legend. Elias had only interacted with him a handful of times. Croft would occasionally call the ranger station, his voice a smooth, deep baritone, to report a fallen tree on one of his private trails, or to request a temporary closure of a public area for one of his exclusive parties. He was always polite. Impeccably so, but there was an undercurrent of command in his voice, the casual assumption of authority. He didn't ask, he informed, but Elias had seen another side of him. He'd seen it in the way Croft's eyes, a pale, cold blue, would linger on the young female staff at the park's visitor center. He'd seen it in the dismissive flick of his wrist as he spoke to a local contractor. He'd seen the flash of irritation, a brief, ugly tightening of his jaw, when his demands weren't met with immediate fawning obedience. It was a fleeting glimpse of the predator beneath the philanthropist's skin, a chilling hint of the absolute, reptilian coldness that lay beneath the polished charm. He had a wife, a fragile, bird-like woman named Isabel who was rarely seen, a virtual prisoner in their glass mansion, and he had a son, Alex, a boy who wore the weight of his father's name like a shroud. Alex Croft was the hidden witness, a ghost of a different kind. He was a boy drowning in his father's shadow. Elias knew him from a distance, a silent, brooding presence in the back of his father's boat or trailing behind him on the golf course. He was 19, a year older than Lily, but he seemed younger, his shoulders perpetually slumped, his eyes always downcast. He had his father's height, but none of his swagger. He was a pale imitation, a failed prince in a kingdom he seemed to despise. The town gossip painted him as troubled. There were whispers of a DUI, of a stint in a high-end rehab clinic, of angry shouting matches that echoed across the lake from the Croft mansion late at night. He was a disappointment to his father, a flaw in the perfect facade Julian Croft had so carefully constructed. Elias's first real encounter with Alex had been a few months prior. He'd found the boy sitting alone on a log by the lake, long after the park was officially closed. He was just staring out at the water, his face pale in the moonlight. Elias had approached cautiously, expecting the usual arrogant defiance of a rich kid caught breaking the rules. Instead, the boy had just looked up at him, his eyes filled with a kind of weary, bottomless sadness. "It's not real, you know," Alex had said, his voice soft, almost inaudible. "What's not real?" Elias had asked. "The serenity." Alex had gestured out at the perfectly still moonlit water. "It's just a surface. Underneath, it's just cold and dark, and things get lost down there." The words had struck Elias as strangely profound, a moment of startling, poetic clarity from a boy he had dismissed as a spoiled brat. He'd let him stay, not having the heart to send him away. He had watched from a distance as Alex pulled out a small, worn leather-bound book and a pen, and began to write, his shoulders hunched against the night. It wasn't a sketchbook. It was a journal. The connection between the three of them, victim, the antagonist, the witness, was a web of secrets and power, spun in the rarefied air of Serenity Estates. Lily, with her fierce ambition and her waitress's uniform, had gotten a summer job working catering for the lavish parties at the Croft mansion. It was a world away from the diner, a glimpse into the life she craved. She'd told Maria about it, her eyes shining. The money was incredible. The people were like something out of a movie. Maria had been uneasy. "They're not our kind of people, Mia," she'd warned, her hands plunged into a sink of soapy water. "Be careful. Men like that, they see a girl like you as a curiosity, a toy." Lily had laughed it off. "I'm not a child, Mom. I can handle myself." But she had been a child. A child who saw the world through the lens of her own goodness, who believed in the beauty of ghost orchids and the promise of a better life. She couldn't have understood the predatory darkness that lurked beneath Julian Croft's polished surface. The last time Maria had seen her daughter, Lily had been getting ready for a party at the Croft estate. She was wearing a simple black dress, her hair pinned up, the silver locket resting against her collarbone. She was nervous, but excited. She'd mentioned that Mr. Croft had taken a special interest in her, that he'd been impressed by her drawings. He'd told her he knew people, that he could help her with her college applications, maybe even a scholarship. "He told me he wanted to show me something," Lily had said, a faint blush on her cheeks. "A private collection." Up at the house, Maria's heart had clenched with a nameless fear. Alone. "Alex will be there," Lily had reassured her. "His son. He's nice, quiet, he writes poetry." The pieces clicked into place in Elias's mind with the sickening finality of a cell door slamming shut. Croft, with his cold, predatory eyes. Lily, with her innocent ambition. And Alex, the silent, sad-eyed boy, the unwilling witness, the keeper of his father's secrets. He imagined the scene. The sprawling, sterile mansion, the sound of the party, a distant murmur. Croft, leading Lily away, his hand on the small of her back, his voice a smooth, venomous whisper. Alex watching from the shadows, his journal clutched in his hand, his face a mask of fear and conflict. He imagined Lily's confusion turning to fear, her polite protests met with a cold smile. The realization dawning too late that she was not a guest, but prey. The injustice was a physical weight, crushing the air from Elias's lungs. Croft hadn't just killed a girl, he had extinguished a light. He had taken a life that was striving for beauty, and dragged it down into the cold, silent darkness of the lake, tethering it to the bottom like a piece of trash. And he had done it with the casual arrogance of a man who believed he was above consequences, a man who believed the world was his to own and to discard as he pleased. Elias pulled up the archived footage from the night Lily disappeared. He scanned the cameras around the Croft estate. There she was, arriving in her beat-up sedan. There she was, walking towards the house. And there, hours later, was Croft's black SUV, driving away from the mansion, heading not towards the main road, but down the private, unmonitored service track that led directly to the North Cove. The passenger seat was empty, but the trunk was large enough to hold a secret. The final piece was Alex. Elias found footage from a camera on a hiking trail near the estate, time-stamped an hour after his father's SUV had left. It was Alex. He was running, stumbling through the woods, his face pale and streaked with tears. He wasn't running towards help, he was running away. He was the broken gear in his father's perfect machine. The one person who knew the truth. The one person who might be able to burn the kingdom to the ground. But he was also a son, trapped in a cage of loyalty and fear, his conscience at war with his own survival. Elias stared at the boy's tormented face on the screen, and he knew. The whole rotten, tragic story was there, written in the silent language of the pixels. The victim, the monster, and the haunted, hidden witness. The days following the discovery bled into a grey, paranoid fog. Elias felt the secret in his gut like a shard of glass. Every shadow held a threat, Every unexpected phone call sent a jolt of adrenaline through him. He told no one. To speak of it was to make it real. To set in motion a chain of events he was terrified he couldn't control. He was a park ranger, a man with a government pension and a small, quiet life. Julian Croft was a titan, a man who could crush him. Without a second thought, he watched Maria Hayes from a distance. He saw her at the diner, moving like an automaton, her face a hollow mask of grief. The town had wrapped her in a suffocating blanket of pity, their whispers following her down the street. Such a tragedy. That lake is so dangerous. Poor girl, must have slipped. Each well-intentioned platitude was a lie, a layer of earth shoveled onto Lily's unmarked grave. The injustice of it was a constant low-grade fever in Ilias's blood. He saw Sheriff Brody, too. He saw him talking to Croft at a town fundraiser, the two of them laughing, Croft's hand resting on the sheriff's shoulder in a gesture of casual ownership. Brody's department had officially closed the case. A tragic accident, the report concluded. No evidence of foul play. The words were a mockery, a carefully constructed fiction designed to maintain the serenity that Croft sold for a premium. The conflict escalated inside him, a silent, brutal war. His conscience screamed at him to act, to give Lily a voice, to give Maria the truth. But his fear was a cold, paralyzing hand on his throat. He had a sister in a long-term care facility, the costs astronomical. He depended on his job, on his pension. Croft could take that away with a single phone call. He could do worse. The man who had anchored a girl to the bottom of a lake was not a man who would hesitate to silence a witness. Then, the cruelty sharpened. It grew bolder. It started with the memorial. Maria, in a desperate attempt to reclaim her daughter's memory from the town's platitudes, organized a small lakeside vigil. She put up flyers, her own hand-drawn pictures of Lily, smiling and vibrant. She wanted people to remember the girl, not the tragedy. The night of the vigil, a storm rolled in, a violent, unseasonal tempest that lashed the lake into a fury. Only a handful of people showed up, huddled under umbrellas against the driving rain. Elias was there, standing at the back, his heart aching for the lonely, defiant figure of Maria Hayes as she tried to light a candle against the wind. And then, Croft's boat appeared, the same sleek, powerful speedboat from that night. It roared past the cove, its wake swamping the shore, extinguishing the few candles that had managed to stay lit. It was a deliberate act of contempt, a show of force. Croft wasn't on the boat. Alex was at the helm, his face a pale grim mask in the flashes of lightning. He didn't look at the shore, he just stared straight ahead, his hands gripping the wheel, a puppet dancing on his father's strings. It was a message: this is my lake. Your grief is trespassing. The humiliation was a public spectacle. Maria stood there, drenched and defeated. The drowned memorial, a symbol of her own powerlessness. Elias felt a surge of white-hot rage. The cruelty was so casual, so profound. The next day, the harassment became more personal. A code violation notice was slapped on the door of Maria's diner. The paint was peeling. The sign was not up to the Newtown standards written by a committee chaired by one of Croft's lieutenants. The fines were crippling, enough to shut her down for good. It was a slow, bureaucratic strangulation, Croft using the town's own regulations as a weapon. Elias watched, his helplessness curdling into he was a coward, hiding behind his screens while a good woman was being crushed. He tried to help anonymously, leaving a bundle of cash in the diner's mailbox. Maria used it to pay the first fine, but it was just a temporary reprieve. The violations kept coming. He started shadowing Alex. He saw the boy's torment up close. He saw him at the town's only bar, drinking himself into a stupor. He saw the bruises on his face after another argument with his father. One evening, Elias followed him out to the bluffs overlooking the North Cove. Alex was standing at the edge, staring down at the churning water below. For a terrifying moment, Elias thought he was going to jump. He approached him slowly. "It's a long way down," Elias said, his voice calm. Alex flinched, spinning around, his eyes wide with panic. "What do you want?" he snarled, a cornered animal. I want to know why you're letting him do this, Elias said, his voice low and intense. To her mother, to Lily's memory. Don't you think she deserves better than that? Alex's face crumpled. The bravado vanished, replaced by a raw, childish anguish. You don't understand, he whispered, his voice cracking. You don't know what he's like. You don't know what he'll do. I know what he did, Elias said, the words hanging in the air between them. The terror in Alex's eyes was absolute. He stumbled backward, away from Elias, away from the truth. I don't know what you're talking about, he stammered. Before turning and running, disappearing back into the shadows of his father's kingdom, the encounter changed something. The witness had been seen. The secret was no longer just Ilias's burden. He had shared it, if only for a moment, but it had also made him a threat. The next night, his own small, isolated cabin was targeted. He came home from his shift to find his door unlocked. Nothing was stolen. Nothing was broken. But something was on his kitchen table. A single, perfect ghost orchid, laid carefully on the polished wood. The message was clear, and it was chillingly intimate. I know you know. I can get to you. I can get into your home. You are not safe. The fear was no longer a vague anxiety. It was a cold, solid presence in the room with him. He felt Croft's eyes on him, even when he was alone. He started double-checking the locks, sleeping with a loaded shotgun by his bed. He was no longer just a witness. He was a target. The betrayals cut deeper. He decided to test the waters. To see if he had any allies, he went to Sheriff Brody, not with the full story, but with a hypothetical. He spoke of a powerful man, of a potential crime, of a witness who was too afraid to come forward. Brody listened patiently, his face impassive. When Elias was done, the sheriff leaned back in his chair, his gaze steady. You know, Eli, he said, his voice friendly, almost paternal. This is a small town. We all depend on each other. Mr. Croft has done a lot of good for this community. A man like that, he makes enemies. People get jealous. They make up stories. You have to be careful what you listen to. You wouldn't want to get a reputation as a troublemaker. It could be bad for your career, for your future. It wasn't advice. It was a threat, delivered with a folksy smile. The system wasn't just broken, it was owned. Brody wasn't a public servant. He was Croft's man. Elias left the station with the cold certainty that he was utterly, completely alone. The escalating tension was taking its toll. He wasn't sleeping. He was losing weight. His hands had a permanent tremor. He sat in his surveillance room, the screens blurring before his eyes, the weight of his secret physical pressure on his chest. He was trapped between his fear and his conscience, and the space between them was shrinking every day. He had to do something, but what? To fight a man like Croft, he needed more than the truth. He needed proof, he needed a weapon, and he had no idea where to find one. The antagonist was growing bolder, the victim's family was being tormented, and the witness was a prisoner of his own fear. The injustice was absolute, and the tension was a wire-pulled taut, ready to snap. The turning point came from the most unexpected of sources. It wasn't a grainy video or a leaked document. It was a book of poetry. Elias, driven by a gnawing desperation, had become obsessed with Alex Croft. The boy was the weak link, the cracked foundation of his father's empire. He started digging, not into Julian Croft's finances, but into his son's life. He searched online forums, social media, student publications. He found a literary journal from a private university Alex had attended for a single, disastrous semester before dropping out. Tucked away in its digital pages was a poem by Alex Croft. It was titled, The Cove. Ilias's breath caught in his chest. He read the poem, his eyes flying across the words. It was a work of raw adolescent anguish, full of clumsy metaphors and overwrought emotion. But beneath the amateurish verse, the truth was laid bare. A confession disguised as art. The ghost orchid blooms in the dark, he wrote. Her locket heart, a silver spark. He showed her the stars from the water's edge, and whispered secrets on the ledge. A king whose kingdom is a lie, beneath a cold and watchful sky. I saw the rope, I heard the plea, he tied his silence onto me. And now she sleeps where secrets lie. While on the surface, I drift by. Every line was a dagger. The ghost orchid, the locket, the king, the rope. He tied his silence onto me. It was all there. A signed confession, hidden in plain sight, dismissed by the world as teenage angst. But it wasn't enough. A poem was not proof. It was a clue, a key, but he still needed to find the lock. The poem mentioned secrets whispered on the ledge. It spoke of a king's kingdom being a lie. It had to mean the mansion. The crime hadn't happened at the cove. The cove was just the disposal site. It had happened at the Croft estate. Elias's mind raced. A man like Julian Croft, a man obsessed with control and image, would have his own surveillance, not the public park cameras, but a private high-tech system covering every inch of his property. If Elias could get his hands on that footage, he would have everything. The challenge was impossible. Croft's estate was a fortress, but Elias had an advantage. For 15 years, he had been the park's surveillance expert. He knew the systems, the backdoors, the vulnerabilities. He had installed the original network that Croft had later piggybacked on for his own security. He knew its bones. He spent the next 2 nights in a feverish caffeine-fueled haze, probing the estate's network from the relative safety of his ranger station. He used old access codes, exploited forgotten security flaws, his fingers flying across the keyboard. He was a digital ghost, slipping through firewalls, bypassing alarms. Finally, after hours of frustrating dead ends, he was in a new set of images filled his screen, a god's eye view of the Croft kingdom. He saw the manicured lawns, the infinity pool, the sterile, art-filled hallways of the mansion. He navigated to the archives, his heart pounding. The date, the night Lily disappeared. He found the folder. It was encrypted. Of course it was, but the file name sent a chill down his spine. Ledge. He spent another full day trying to crack the encryption, his mind a tangled mess of code and exhaustion. He was about to give up, his hope dwindling, when he thought of the poem again. He tied his silence onto me. It was a strange phrase. Not swore me to silence, but tied it to him. What if the key wasn't a word, but a thing? Something personal to Alex. He went back to his research. He found a photo of Alex from his high school graduation, a rare image where the boy was almost smiling. Around his neck was a thin leather cord. On it, a single small silver key. A gift from his mother, the caption read, for his 18th birthday. A key to his first car. Elias's fingers trembled as he typed in the license plate number of the car. Alex had been driving that year, a vintage Mustang. He hit enter. The file decrypted. The video began to play. The plot twist was not a single moment, but a slow, horrifying unfurling. The camera was positioned on the stone ledge of a private terrace overlooking the lake. The party was a distant thrum in the background. Julian Croft was there, his back to the camera, talking to Lily. She looked nervous, clutching her sketchbook to her chest. The audio was crystal clear. "Your drawings are remarkable, Lily," Croft said, his voice a silken purr. "You have a rare talent, a fragile, beautiful thing. It needs to be protected, nurtured." "Thank you, Mr. Croft," she said, her voice small. "That means a lot. I have a proposition for you," he continued, turning slightly. Elias could see his profile, the predatory line of his jaw. "A scholarship. A full ride to the best art institute in the country. I'll make all the arrangements. All you have to do is be grateful." He moved closer. Lily took a step back, her smile faltering. I don't understand." "Oh, I think you do," Croft said, his voice losing its warmth, replaced by a chilling flatness. "You're a smart girl. You know how the world works. Nothing is free. Everything has a price." He reached out, his hand closing around her arm. She tried to pull away, her face a mask of confusion and dawning horror. "Please, Mr. Croft. I should get back to work." "Your work is here now," he said. His grip tightening, the scene escalated with brutal speed. Her pleas turned to panicked sobs. He was no longer a charming benefactor. He was a monster, His face twisted with a sense of absolute entitlement. He dragged her towards the doors leading back into the mansion. And then, Alex appeared. He stepped onto the terrace, his face pale. "Dad, stop," he said, his voice shaking. "Let her go." Croft turned, his eyes blazing with fury. "Get out of here, Alex. This doesn't concern you. Go back to your little book and your pathetic poems." "No," Alex said, his voice gaining a sliver of strength. "This is wrong. Just let her go home." For a moment, Croft seemed to consider it. He loosened his grip on Lily, but then his eyes fell on the sketchbook she had dropped. He bent down and picked it up. He flipped through the pages, his expression shifting from anger to something else, something colder. He stopped on one page. He held it up. It was a portrait, a charcoal sketch of him, Julian Croft. But it was not the face of the public philanthropist. It was the face Elias had seen in glimpses. The cold eyes, the cruel twist of the mouth, the predatory stillness. Lily, with her artist's clarity, had seen the truth of him and captured it on the page. She had seen the monster. That was her real crime. "You see me, don't you?" Croft whispered, his voice full of a strange, chilling wonder. He looked from the drawing to Lily's terrified face. "You see right through me." He dropped the book and he lunged. The rest was a blur of motion and muffled sounds. He pushed her against the stone balustrade. Lily fought back, scratching at his face. There was a sickening crack as her head hit the stone. She went limp. Alex cried out, a strangled, horrified sound. Croft stood over her, breathing heavily, his perfect suit now disheveled. He looked down at the unconscious girl, then at his son. The mask was gone. All that was left was the cold reptilian core. "You see what she made me do?" he hissed, his voice a venomous whisper. "This is what happens when people don't know their place. This is what happens when they see things they're not supposed to see." The conspiracy unfolded from there. The video didn't end. It captured the next hour in meticulous, horrifying detail. It showed Croft, with a terrifying calm efficiency, retrieving a coil of rope and a heavy anchor from a storage locker. Showed him calling his head of security, a former state police officer, a man whose loyalty Croft had bought and paid for. It showed the two of them wrapping Lily's body in a canvas tarp. The most damning part was the conversation he had with his son. He backed Alex against the wall, his face inches from his son's. "You saw nothing," Croft said, his voice low and menacing. "You were in your room all night. You are sick. You are unstable. No one will believe a word you say, but if you ever breathe a word of this to anyone, I will destroy you. I will have you committed. I will ruin Maria Hayes. I will burn down everything you have ever cared about. Your silence is the only thing that keeps you safe. Your silence is the only thing that keeps her mother safe. Do you understand me?" He grabbed the silver key from around Alex's neck. "And I will keep this, just as a reminder of our little secret. A reminder that I own you." He had weaponized Alex's love for his mother, his fear for Maria, his own fragile stability. He had tied his silence to him with a threat of absolute destruction. Elias felt a cold, clean wave of certainty wash over him, clearing the fog of fear and indecision. The tension snapped. The stakes were no longer personal. This wasn't just about Lily anymore. It was about a conspiracy that reached into the heart of the town's power structure. It was about a monster who wore the mask of a savior. He saved the file. He made 3 copies, uploading one to a secure cloud server, one to a thumb drive he hid in his cabin, and one he kept on his person. He had the weapon. He had the proof. The full, ugly, undeniable truth, captured in high-definition video. The plot had twisted from a hidden crime into a public scandal waiting to explode. And he, Elias Thorne, the quiet watcher, the ghost in the machine, was about to light the fuse. The stage for the cinematic payoff was not a courtroom, but a town hall meeting. It was an annual event, a self-congratulatory affair where the town's leadership celebrated their achievements. This year, the keynote address was to be given by their great benefactor, Julian Croft. He was set to announce his most ambitious project yet. The Serenity Future Fund, a massive development plan that would effectively privatize another third of the national park. It was to be his coronation, the final cementing of his legacy. Elias spent 2 days preparing, moving with a clarity and purpose he hadn't felt in years. The fear was still there, a cold knot in his stomach, but it was overshadowed by a righteous, burning anger. He reached out to only one person, Maria Hayes. He met her in the pre-dawn gloom behind her diner. He didn't show her the video. He couldn't put her through that, but he told her what was on it. He told her everything. He watched as her grief, the hollow, passive sorrow she had worn for weeks, hardened into something else. It hardened into rage. Her eyes, which had been dull with pain, now glinted like steel. "What do you need me to do?" she asked, her voice steady. The town hall was packed. The air was thick with anticipation and the cloying scent of catered food. The local news channel had a camera crew set up in the back. Sheriff Brody stood by the stage, beaming, a loyal dog waiting for his masters. Praise. The elite of Oak Haven and Serenity Estates filled the front rows, their faces a mixture of smugness and adoration. Elias slipped into a seat at the very back, a laptop bag resting on his knees. He was just another face in the crowd, a quiet park ranger, invisible. Maria sat near the front, a solitary, grim figure, in a plain black dress. Alex was there too, seated beside his mother, Isabel. He looked like a ghost, his face ashen, his eyes fixed on the floor. The mayor's introduction of Julian Croft was fawning, a litany of his supposed generosity and vision. Finally, Croft took the stage to thunderous applause. He stood at the podium, basking in the light, his smile as wide and brilliant as a searchlight. He was the king in his castle, untouchable, adored. "Thank you, Mayor," he began, his voice resonating through the hall, smooth and confident. "Thank you, friends. It is my profound honor to stand before you tonight, not just as a resident of this beautiful community, but as its partner, its guardian." He launched into his speech, a masterpiece of public relations, full of empty promises about progress and prosperity. Elias's heart hammered against his ribs. He opened his laptop, his fingers hovering over the keyboard. Croft was building to his crescendo. "The Serenity Future Fund is more than just a development plan," he boomed. "It is a promise to protect the beauty of this place, to preserve the innocence." At that word, innocence, Maria Hayes stood up. A murmur went through the crowd. All eyes turned to her. Croft paused, his smile tightening almost imperceptibly. "Ma'am, if you have a question, there will be a time for that later." "My daughter was innocent," Maria said, her voice not loud, but carrying a weight that cut through the room's comfortable atmosphere. It was the voice of a mother's grief, raw and undeniable. Croft's expression flickered. "My deepest condolences for your loss, Maria. A truly terrible accident." "It was not an accident," Maria said, her voice rising, gaining strength. "You know what happened to her. You know what you did." Sheriff Brody started to move towards her, but she didn't flinch. "You murdered my daughter, Julian. You killed my Lily." The room erupted in gasps and shocked whispers. Croft laughed, a short, dismissive sound. "This is absurd. The woman is clearly distraught. Sheriff, perhaps you could escort Mrs. Hayes out. She needs help." "She's not the one who needs help," a new voice said. It was Elias. He was standing now, his laptop in his hands. "She's telling the truth, Sheriff, and I have proof." Every head in the room swiveled towards him. Croft stared at him, his eyes narrowing, the first crack appearing in his perfect facade. "And who are you?" "My name is Elias Thorne. I'm a park ranger. And for the last several weeks, I've been watching you, Mr. Croft." Elias turned the laptop around, facing the audience. But he wasn't showing them. He was showing the news camera at the back of the room. He hit play. The video feed from his laptop was patched directly into the hall's main projector. Suddenly, the massive screen behind Croft, the one that was supposed to be displaying architectural renderings of his glorious future, flickered to life. It was the footage from the terrace. The silence in the room was absolute, profound. The only sound was the audio from the video, a ghostly echo of that terrible night. The audience watched, mesmerized in horror, as the scene unfolded. They saw their savior, their benefactor, their king, his face twisted with rage. They heard Lily's pleas. They heard the sickening crack as her head hit the stone. Alex Croft let out a strangled sob, burying his face in his hands. His mother, Isabel, stared at the screen, her hand flying to her mouth, her eyes wide with a horror that seemed to be dawning for the first time. Julian Croft stood frozen at the podium, his face a canvas of disbelief turning to pure animalistic fury. The public mask was gone, ripped away, and the monster was exposed for all to see. The video continued. They watched him get the rope. They heard his chilling, venomous threats to his own son. They saw the conspiracy laid bare, the cold, efficient cleanup, the utter lack of remorse. When the video showed Croft taking the silver key from Alex's neck, Maria Hayes reached into her pocket and pulled something out. It was Alex's journal. He had anonymously mailed it to her 2 days before, a final, desperate act of a conscience that could no longer bear its burden. She opened it to a marked page. "He tied his silence onto me," she read, her voice ringing through the silent hall. That the video ended. The screen went black. For a moment, no one moved, no one breathed. The exposure was total, the justice absolute. It was a viral bombshell, broadcast live, a public execution of a man's reputation and soul. Then, the spell broke. People were shouting, crying, screaming. Sheriff Brody stood paralyzed, his face pale, realizing he had backed the wrong monster. Croft made a move to run, but Elias was ready. He had anticipated it. He tackled him, a lifetime of frustration and rage fueling the impact. They went down in a heap, the king of Serenity Lake flailing on the floor like a common criminal. The public arrest was a chaotic, cathartic explosion, as 2 state troopers, whom Elias had tipped off and who were waiting outside, stormed in and slapped handcuffs on Croft's wrists. His eyes found Elias's. The look in them was not of defeat, but of pure, unadulterated hatred, a promise of revenge. But as they dragged him away, past the shocked faces of his former worshippers, past the weeping figure of his son, his gaze fell on Maria. She stood her ground, her eyes locked on his. She didn't look triumphant, she just looked free. She had faced the monster, and she had won. The cinematic payoff was complete, a shocking, public immolation of a powerful man, brought down by a grieving mother, a haunted boy, and a quiet watcher who had finally found his voice. The emotional aftermath was not a quiet healing, but the slow, painful process of lancing a wound that had poisoned an entire community. The arrest of Julian Croft sent shockwaves through Oakhaven. The king was dead, his kingdom in ruins, and his former subjects were left to sift through the wreckage of his lies. The trial was a media circus, a spectacle of wealth and depravity that drew reporters from across the country. The video was played again and again, each viewing a fresh wave of horror. Croft's high-priced lawyers tried to discredit it, to discredit Elias, to paint Alex as a mentally unstable drug addict. But the evidence was too absolute, the images too damning. The truth, once revealed, could not be unseen. Alex Croft, in a move that stunned everyone, took the stand against his father. His testimony was quiet, halting, and utterly devastating. He recounted the night of the murder, his voice cracking as he described his own fear and cowardice. He confessed to the desecration of the memorial, to the campaign of harassment against Maria, all done under his father's orders. He was not asking for forgiveness. He was simply setting the record straight, a final, painful act of atonement. His father stared at him from the defendant's table, his face a mask of stone-cold fury. The bond between them, already twisted and toxic, was severed for good. Julian Croft was found guilty. Murder in the first degree. Conspiracy. Tampering with evidence. The judge, a woman from outside the county, showed no mercy. Life in prison, no possibility of parole. The verdict was a collective exhale for the town, a release of pressure that had been building for years, but justice did not bring peace. It left a scar. The Croft mansion on the bluff, once a symbol of power and aspiration, became a monument to a crime. It sat empty, its glass walls reflecting the empty sky, a haunted house on the hill. Isabel Croft filed for divorce and disappeared with what was left of the family fortune, taking Alex with her. They moved to a place where their name meant nothing, seeking an anonymity that might, one day, feel like a new beginning. Maria Hayes closed the diner. She couldn't bear the pitying looks anymore, the whispers that still followed her. She sold it to a young couple and used the money, along with a substantial settlement from the Croft estate, to create the Lily Hayes Foundation, a charity that provided scholarships to underprivileged girls who wanted to study art or science. It was a quiet, defiant act of creation in the face of so much destruction. Elias Thorne became a reluctant hero. He was offered promotions, awards, a desk job. At the regional headquarters, he turned them all down. He had no desire for accolades. The experience had changed him, scraped him raw. He could no longer sit in a dark room and watch the world through a screen. He transferred to a remote outpost on the other side of the park. A place of rugged, untamed wilderness, far from the placid, deceptive surface of Serenity Lake. He spent his days on foot, walking the trails, breathing the clean cold air, feeling the sun on his face. He was a ranger, again, a guardian of something real. One crisp autumn afternoon, a year after the trial, he found himself back at the North Cove. The water was a deep, brilliant blue. The trees along the shore, a riot of red and gold. It was beautiful, serene, but he could not unsee what lay beneath. The memory was a permanent part of the landscape now. At the water's edge, a small, simple memorial had been erected. It wasn't the grand public monument the town had proposed. It was a simple granite bench, paid for by Maria. Engraved on it was a line from one of Lily's favorite poets. In one of the stars I shall be living. In one of them I shall be laughing. Beside the bench, planted in the damp, rich earth, was a small, thriving cluster of ghost orchids. Elias sat on the bench for a long time, watching the light change on the water. The rage had faded, replaced by a quiet, lingering sorrow. The cost of the truth had been immense. A life extinguished, a family destroyed, a town's innocence shattered. He thought of Lily, with her sketchbook and her fierce, bright dreams. He thought of Alex, a boy forced to bear witness to an unspeakable horror. He thought of Maria, a mother whose love had proven stronger than a king's power. The world was not a simple place of good and evil. It was a tangled, messy landscape of courage and cowardice, of cruelty and compassion. He had learned that the hardest truths are often hidden in plain sight, and that sometimes the most profound serenity can only be found on the other side of a terrible storm. A breeze rustled the leaves, whispering through the pines. It sounded, for a moment, like a sigh of relief. The haunting was not over, but the ghost had been heard. Her story had been told, and in the quiet of the cove, that felt like a kind of peace. He stood up, adjusted the pack on his shoulders, and walked back into the woods, leaving the lake to keep its secrets, its surface once again a perfect, placid mirror, reflecting nothing but the vast, empty sky.